United Alliance Institute by Kitty Cat on AO3. Chapter 4, The Branding. Summary. Eijiro and Ochako experience their first branding. Izuku meets with Kachan. Eijiro woke with a start, trying to catch himself from falling off the bottom bunk, sighing as he managed to. Jiro wasn't as lucky, and he pulled back in time to barely miss her smacking her face on the ground from the floor above him. "Ow," she groaned, sitting up, and he almost laughed at the pained expression on her face, before he saw what or who had woken them up. Two soldiers streamed in, rifles still slung to their back, and a large case in the second one's hands. The first one grinned, eyes scanning the five of them as they shuffled awkwardly to the center of the room. This is how they had been given food for the past month, 3 times a day. He didn't think he had been asleep that long. The woman with black bobbed hair, the same one who had given him the metal plate a month ago. He had been counting the days. First year's first, followed by second, and the 7th year. Jiro and Koda's face fell, rubbing the back of both of their necks. Koda's hair was somehow always buzzed, a blanket around his shoulders whenever Eijiro saw him. Jiro's hair was always down, covering her shoulders, but even Ochako looked wary, rubbing her hands together. "What is it?" he asked in a panicked voice as a chair was dragged from the corner of the room by the small table. Jiro opened her mouth to say something before the woman barked out an order. 9762. Sit. She gripped the back of the chair, and Eijiro's hair stood on end as he recognized the number. That's what all the guards ever called him, what Death Midoriya had called him. He complied out of fear for what would happen if he didn't, the cut from Midoriya still aching. The woman touched the badly cut bangs Midoriya had given him, scoffing slightly. He heard the case open, his shoulders tensing as he forced himself not to look back over his shoulder. Something told him this woman wouldn't like it. A loud buzzing started, and Eijiro bit his lip as something cold touched his forehead, moving backwards along his hair. No. A lock of black hair fell onto his lap, and he touched it gently, his fingers tightening. They were cutting off his hair. His thoughts were drowned out as he swore the sound of the clippers grew louder and louder, searching each face for an explanation. Ochako and the others looked sorry, frightened, but the teen's face was hard, his lip twitching in what Eijiro saw as rage. The ones who had been here longer had clearly been through this before. They knew they would do this, but they didn't warn him. He watched a tear fall down Ochako's face as he snapped back to reality, the clippers shutting off. He went to stand up, but a strong hand grabbed him and held him down. "Not so fast, 9762. He didn't relax under the grip, but she eventually let go, probably knowing he couldn't fight back. He would risk getting shot if he tried anything. He had heard gunshots through the walls before, the sounds of screams from other rooms. There was a loud ripping sound, like Velcro mixed with something sticky, being pulled apart, and his hands went rock hard in his lap. He quickly tucked them between his legs as the other kid's eyes went big, except for the teen, who just raised an eyebrow. He hadn't meant to. He couldn't get it under control. He had to get it under control before they saw it. He took a deep breath at the same time they pressed something against the back of his neck. He screamed as they pressed harder, a hand grabbing the front of his neck and forced him to stay in place. It felt like 1,000 fire ants burrowing themselves into his neck as he tried to pull forward, every instinct in his body telling him to escape. He had to escape. Finally, the pain lessened, and the hand on his neck dropped away as he gasped, collapsing forward out of the chair onto his knees. He could feel the fading fire still, his hands twitching, but finally becoming normal, the bandage shredded to pieces. He hesitantly touched the back of his neck with his other hand, his fingers coming back red and warm. Jiro rushed forward to help him, and his stomach twisted into knots, threatening to throw everything up as she helped him to his feet. He could feel the blood run down his back, his hands shaking as he stared down at them. "There is a guard waiting for you outside. You will be supplied a towel and soap," the woman said, so scripted as if she did this every day. How many people had she forced to go through that pain, to strip away who they were? How much worse would it get? She raised an eyebrow as Eijiro looked up at her, swallowing slowly. He nodded without saying a word, not trusting himself not to vomit, stepping out of Jiro's touch. He watched Ochako step up next, her skin visibly paler than it should be as she sat down, blood getting on the back of her tank top. He forced his eyes away as the buzzing started up, walking forward across the concrete, each step agony. Hopefully the shower would be hot this time. Izuku skipped down the halls into the training room he usually used, a knife pressed to his throat in a second. He didn't move, his fingers gently clicking the lock as the knife pressed further in. He finally threw his elbow back, managing to hit ribs as he ducked under and grabbed the wrist, forcing it to twist and drop the knife. Kayama laughed slightly, rubbing at her wrist as he grinned up at her proudly. "Not bad, kid," she said with a laugh before pain went through him. "But you forgot my other hand." He glanced down, pinned between the wall and the blade she had leveled at a lung, ripping his tank top slightly. She pushed in further to prove she had won, but Izuku did not concede to him. He pressed into the blade, the pain coursing through him, but he let it, his hand twitching at his side. "Izuku," Kayama warned. He knew she wouldn't concede to him either, the knife held steady. It was a show of weakness and defeat, and neither of them had those qualities. "You're hurting yourself," she said, but Izuku pressed in more, the blood running down the front of his shirt. Just a little bit more. He shifted to the side, the blade moving as well as he pressed closer into her. He flicked his wrist forward, the small blade he kept in his shirt dropping out as he pressed it into her thigh, directly above her femoral artery. She laughed slightly as he pressed more, his gaze matched to hers, her eyes moving up into something like pride. She stepped back, laughing slightly as he tucked his blade back into the band he wore on his wrist. He held the other hand to his side, the blood seeping between his fingers. "I would have nearly 7 minutes till I bled out from a cut there. How long would you be able to survive from a punctured lung?" she asked, wiping at the small trail of blood on her thigh. He shrugged, lifting up the shirt before it could fully cake with blood, using his opposite hand to reach for his band-aids as he put the shirt in his mouth. "Depends," he said through clenched teeth, pulling the bandages out and holding them to the wound. She watched him, not quizzing him anymore, as he worked slowly, getting the bandages around his torso and waist, making sure the pressure on the wound hurt. It had to be tight. "If I bled into a lung, I could survive long enough to get outside to the guards. However, had you managed to get enough force to slice completely through my side, I probably wouldn't make it to the door, but the femoral artery would kill you before you could manage that force." He wiped the blood from the side of his mouth, tucking the remaining bandages, now with red fingerprints, into his belt again. She hummed, shaking her head slightly as he looked up at her. "You won't always be here. What would you have done in the field?" Izuku shrugged, walking over and grabbing his staff where it hung on the wall. "That's in 6 years. I have time to stay here. Plus, no one would get the jump on me like that." He swung the staff down, turning to grin at her. She watched him with an almost sad expression, but he brushed it off, kicking off his shoes as he moved to the center of the room. He gestured to her staff, his lips raised in a grin. "A little cut doesn't stop you," he teased her, his own cut aching as he purposely tried to push it from his brain. "But it will send you to the infirmary again," she said, not moving for her weapon. He groaned, hitting the butt of his staff against the dirt floor, tipping his head. "Your father has another business trip. We leave in an hour," she commented as she wiped the blade on her pants, tucking it back into her holder. Izuku hesitated, his mind trying to come up with an excuse. "You guys just came back," he finally argued, leaning onto his staff. "Do you really have to leave again?" She scoffed, walking over to him slowly. Her platform boots clacked on the dirt, but it didn't make him tense or nervous. She would never truly hurt him. "The newest shipment was a month ago. He has sent the regiments and surgeons know their orders. We need to deal with some unrest overseas." "At the Shields Institute?" Izuku asked, shaking his head as he laughed. "They're a joke. None of their soldiers come out alive after the fights." He had looked and read over the files of the other institute often. Besides from his father's trips there and the trade of levels once a year, there was never any real communication between the two. No competition. Kayama laughed, ruffling his hair as he looked up at her, pushing his head into her hand. "But they serve their purpose. The government's attention is divided between us both, and it doesn't keep us as the only danger in the world," she explained, like Tsunotori had explained to him many times before. He knew the whole spiel of how the institutes came to be, the shields on the other side of the globe. They got mostly quirked ones from that side, while UAI got the other countries. Pony had spoken a bit about the softness of the Shields Institute. They had been part of the level of trades between them to keep their connections. They were far more advanced in English than any of the others that they had been able to train, though each was fluent in 4 languages by the time they were deployed to a station for orders out there. "So it's just personal sparring again?" he asked, sitting on the floor. He hated when they disappeared for a month or 2 at a time, losing his fighting partner. No one else ever sparred with him, besides the experiments he had to perform. She hummed, shaking her head as she looked down at him. "No, I have a recruit in mind to take over. It'll do you good to fight someone else." His grin grew as he popped back up, using his staff as a bracer. He might not be able to take Kayama down yet, but he could definitely take down any other soldier. She was the head of security for a reason. "Are they here?" he asked, looking around the empty room. He bounced up onto his toes to get a better look, biting his lip and settling down as the pain radiated from his side. Kayama sighed, reaching forward to help him up, but he smacked her hand away, grinning in pain. "You should go get that looked at. I'll have Yamada ready for your training tomorrow." She didn't try to look at it, but he could see something flicker behind her eyes, a look he didn't like. "I'll be back when I can." Izuku watched her go, swinging his staff around to better lean on it. The door opened and shut, leaving him alone in the small room. He considered his options before begrudgingly pushing himself forward, leaning on the staff. He'd have to see Recovery Girl before he could fight properly, and the lack of training opened it up for more experiments with the level 5s today. Izuku wished that Recovery Girl would have sent him to bed rest, but all she had done was dump stinging antiseptics in the cut, stuffed it, and wrapped it up. He would have to go and get it taken out later, but for now the pain medication was helping to dull it all. But the walk to the other side of the institute made his side ache and his head pound. He loved the level 5s. They were powerful and the best quirks to play with. They had one who could control wind and another who could phase through most materials. That's why the level 5s were so far away from everyone. Each room was designed to specifically contain them, and they had their own set of guards assigned to each one. So they needed the space and distance from other trainees. But he had to admit he was putting off working with them. Not because he didn't have any ideas. He had so many experiments and ideas he couldn't wait to try. No, he was dreading the stairs. In all his years at the Institute, the stairs to the level 5 pit was something he had always hated. 942 steps just to get to the bottom level. He counted them every time he went down, just in case they changed slightly. He finally made it to the bottom, his side aching and his feet numb as he clutched his notebook looking around. The level 5 area was built deep into the floor to prevent any attempts at escape. However, with no technology being allowed for fear of hacking or quirk issues, stairs were the only way to do it. And once you were down there, it was a labyrinth with twisting passages and dead ends. Izuku had memorized them when he was a child and could walk the place blindfolded, the cold air making him shiver slightly. Situated in the center was the training room, reaching to ground height to allow for aerial movements and a thick pane of bulletproof glass at the top. Izuku ignored it for now, hopping on his heels as he made his way down the second passage, humming an old song he got stuck in his head that morning. "Ka-chan," Izuku called, opening the door to the level 5's room. It was plain as it always was, a bed and a table, along with a small punching bag. Ka-chan was seated, watching him closely, his posture relaxed and uncaring. "I have more time today to spend on your quirk." He bounced on his heels, holding his notebook tightly to his chest. He shouldn't have nicknamed the quirked ones, but he had seen Ka-chan's name at a glance at the first shipment he could ever remember and had instantly fallen in love with the quirk. It was simply amazing what all it could do. 5 years later, and the quirk was on level with the graduates. As he turned around to pull back open the door and lead Ka-chan out, he felt the wind change, growing warmer. He grinned, dropping his notebook and ducking under the flying hand, a large explosion sounding from directly behind him. Ka-chan screamed in anger, and Izuku grabbed the right hook that came at him, flipping the quirked one on his back. He pressed his heel into the neck, keeping the arm twisted at an odd position, as he grabbed and flicked out his knife. "Miss me?" he asked, twisting his heel. One push, and the quirked one would be unable to fight back. One push into the artery, and he could disarm the quirk's capabilities. One push into the windpipe, and he could make them lose oxygen. Ka-chan gasped, trying to take Izuku's hand with his other hand, but Izuku tipped the blade further, tipping his head to the side. As blood trickled down the arm, Ka-chan finally looked away, their fists tightening. They didn't give up, but they did know when they were beat. Stepping off the neck, Izuku hummed loudly, flicking and putting his knife back into the holder on his belt. Izuku picked up his notebook, flipping it around in his hands as he watched Kacchan push themselves to their feet. "I would hate to ruin the quirk requirements of yours," he commented, watching the one carefully from the corner of his eye. He walked to the door before pausing, spinning on his heel to get a better look at the defiant one. They glared at Izuku, lips curled up in a snarl, hands tied at their sides. They stood out like a sore thumb in the room, light hair against dark concrete. They had a rug, but had decided to burn it after the first day. Izuku didn't mind much. "Get dressed," he finally said, giggling at the rage expression. "I have new ideas." He turned back around, not fearing another attack. Kacchan wasn't stupid. They knew from experience Izuku wasn't as nice the second time they tried something obvious. He opened and shut the door behind him, bouncing on his heels as he turned to look at one of the guards stationed beside the door. "Take 2748 to the centers in 5 minutes. Inform the cleaners as well." The guard nodded slowly, almost hesitantly, as Izuku hummed happily, turning back down the labyrinth. He turned hallways, walking past the half-and-half user's room, pausing. The user had started using his fire more, but Izuku swore they were purposely hurting themselves with it, burns growing all down their ice side. Still, it had grown, and they hadn't tried Izuku since the infirmary a month ago. Izuku went on his toes, peeking into the two-toned user's bare room. He hadn't meant to make them boring, but he had, the user not fighting anymore, simply self-destructing. Izuku would need to work that out. He shrugged, rocking back on his heels as he continued down the hallways, clutching his notebook tightly. He finally made it back to the center training room, pressing the keys from his neck into the lock while also hitting the secret key under the side of the door frame. It clicked open and he hummed, pulling the key back and shutting the door behind him. He had so much to get ready in 5 minutes. Unlike the other dirt training floors, this one was made from a sheet of metal layers over heavy brick. Fire users were often leaving with burnt feet from not controlling their quirks enough. The lights were covered by bulletproof glass as well, preventing any injuries when the quirks grew, and they grew oh so beautifully down here, almost making the stairs worth it. It was why he loved visiting the level 5s, why he wouldn't force them upstairs to join him. He could push them to the limits down here, no risk of hurting anyone else, and plenty of staff on call if they hurt themselves. It was the perfect place, and Izuku took a deep breath, turning to his cabinet in the corner of the room. It was the only item in the room itself, strong metal with planks of wood holding it together. No trainee had ever tried to destroy it, knowing the hazard it would be. Vials upon vials and different training instruments Izuku loved were stored there. He watched the cleaners file in from the corner of his eyes, moving to the adjacent room, thick glass and a large metal door slamming shut. He shrugged, grinning as he put out his instruments, his hand lingering over each. He had asked ice to be brought down as well, but it had yet to arrive, much to his dismay. So instead, he focused on what he did have, vials and syringes separated from the sharp instruments. He rocked on his heels, continuing to hum as the door opened behind him. He didn't bother to turn around this time, already hearing Kacchan's heavy breathing. He knew the guard was still there, by the way Kacchan didn't lunge at him. They never tried anything when a guard with a rifle was there, which was ridiculous, because Izuku could shoot and kill them just as easily, perhaps even faster than some of the new hires. "Leave," Izuku ordered, grinning as he shut the cabinet and pressed his finger to the lock, waiting. It clicked locked at the same time the door did, but Izuku was ready. As the air grew in heat just slightly and he could hear whistling, he had already taken the 3-point knife from the table, his hand gripping it easily. He spun around on his heel, stepping to the side of his right hook and holding the knife steady. He didn't even have to drive the knife into the quirked one as they impaled themselves, gasping loudly in shock. Izuku sighed at the slow reaction time, though his grin didn't falter as he took their opposite shoulder, holding them in place. If they wanted to act like a child, they would get punished the only way that seemed to work. Their eyes widened in shock, tears starting to well in their eyes as they gritted their teeth defiantly. Izuku twisted the knife slightly, and a scream of pain managed to leave their lips, their hands popping dangerously close to Izuku's face. He could feel the sparks hitting his cheek, but he didn't step down until the pops died out. Kacchan could injure him if they wanted, but they would be dead before they could finish the job, and they always seemed to value their lives above harming Izuku. But that defiant look, that was why Kacchan was Izuku's favorite. He finally let go of their shoulder, ripping the blade out as it squelched with blood and skin. He set the blade on the mat to the side of him, kneeling to Kacchan's height. He was crumbled in a ball, holding his hands to the cut as blood seeped through the fingers. Izuku could feel his own cut, screaming at the movement, but he grinned wider, watching the user glare up at him. "Close it," he said simply, tipping his head. Kacchan didn't move, his eyes narrowing as the blood seeped out. "Close it," Izuku ordered again, pressing his father's voice, his smile faltering just slightly. It lit back up as the popping started, and Kacchan's eyes shut in pain and concentration. Izuku watched in fascination as beads of sweat collected on their temple, their entire body twitching as the popping grew louder and louder. Slowly it died out, the smell of charred flesh and blood hanging in the air as Izuku clapped his hands, standing up. His own wound ached and pulled, but he hummed, looking down at Kacchan. Their cut blonde hair hung in spikes that Izuku could never tame, their gaze fixed on the pile of blood below them. "Stand," Izuku said, reaching down and offering a hand to help them up. They slapped it away, teeth grinding as they straightened up with only a small wince, favoring their other side. Izuku shrugged, letting them catch their breath as he picked the blade up again and ran the sanitizer rag down the length of it, collecting all the blood. It was one of his favorite instruments, the twisted three-point design allowing for it to be the most efficient. He tossed the rag into the bucket on the bottom shelf, setting the now clean knife back on the table. He hated getting blood on his clothes, even if they didn't show through the black. It was just sticky and gross and extremely unhygienic to have another's blood all over you. It's why he liked his gun and staff so much, keeping people at long distances. He finally turned his attention back to Kacchan, whose crimson eyes glared at him, piercing into him. Izuku grinned wider, giggling slightly at the intimidation attempt, watching the sweat drop down. "You're still standing," he finally observed, stepping around the still quirked one. "That is far better than the first time you cauterized a wound." The level 5's quirks always grew quickly, and Izuku couldn't help but giggle slightly as he came back in front of the quirked one. He took their hands, holding them tight in case they resisted, which they didn't. "Your calluses have built up very nicely." He ran his fingers over the user's blisters and calluses on their palm, pressing lightly. When the user pulled their hand back, Izuku let them, his attention now on the costume. He hadn't been old enough to help his mom during the first design of the explosion suit, but they had made small changes over the years, and Izuku could not be happier with the result. In essence, it was a sleeveless turtleneck, with the neck part reaching up into a loose-fitting collar that covered the smoke mask underneath. The shirt was tight, allowing both for movement and some added support to the back. The pants were large, filled with pockets, tucked into ankle compression socks and large combat boots. The belt had small grenades that they fabricated using nitroglycerin-like sweat that would only explode with the right compounds from the user. The metal shoulder braces covered and protected the joints from injury, with larger blasts and tight compression bands around the elbow and wrists helped there. They had tried gloves at one point to keep the sweat buildup, but no matter which fabric they used, the direct contact with the blasts left them destroyed. While the quirk was powerful, it was showy and not great for assassination missions, so they had used bright orange highlights for their rings throughout the costume and the end canisters. Izuku hummed, tracing his fingers over the now burned-together skin, covering all the scars Izuku knew they had. The seal was messy, not to the point Izuku wished it was, but the bleeding had stopped. He pressed slightly, and the user's teeth grated together. He grinned more, running his fingers over the new cut in the fabric. It had taken some of the energy from the knife wound, leaving the user with less damage than should have been. Unfortunately, it had ripped through the material, but the high-grade fabric had stood up against the explosions. "How did it feel?" he asked as he took the rag and wiped down the costume that didn't absorb liquids, the blood seeping onto the floor. He tossed it back in the bucket as the quirked one just grunted, refusing to speak. He never gave proper answers, and it did slow down Izuku's process slightly. It just made him have to do more experiments. He grinned, bouncing on his heels as he reached for the blade again. "It hurt like a fucking bitch," Kacchan finally said, and Izuku pulled his hand back, clapping as he laughed slightly. He nodded, reaching up and wiping his thumb along the quirked one's temple as he grinned slightly. "Bite worse than bark." Izuku giggled at the thought of the user in front of him as an angry dog, rubbing the sweat-laced substance between his fingers. It was truly an interesting phenomenon, not quite nitroglycerin, but with similar properties that only reacted to the user's increased heat production in times of stress or activation. In technicality, he was a mutant with other properties, but most users' bodies adjusted to fit the quirk they had been given. Most. There were a few instances where it didn't, like the fire user from years ago. He shook his head, grinning wider as he tried to get back on track. "How have your sessions gone?" he asked, turning around to pick up the first empty cap syringe. Kacchan didn't say anything at first, though Izuku gave him plenty of time to, shrugging. "Fine," he said, a short and simple answer. Izuku hummed, still grinning as he motioned for the user's arm. The user met Izuku's gaze, and Izuku raised an eyebrow, daring them to make a move. After a second, they just raised their arm. Izuku grinned, uncapping the syringe and needle combo. He grabbed for Kacchan's wrist, pushing his thumb into the skin. He used the other hand to push the needle into the exposed vein, holding it steady as he used his thumb to pull back on the plunger. He watched it fill to the top line before slowly removing the needle and putting his thumb over the small pinprick. "How has your healing changed?" he asked, putting the end of the needle and depositing the blood into a sterile vial before tossing the syringe into a safe deposit box. He picked up the next syringe, giving the user plenty of time to think of the correct response. "No," he finally said, as Izuku tipped his head, grinning as he stared at the needle tip. He turned to look at Kacchan, knowing that wasn't true. He was no longer limping on the injured legs, and the bags under his eyes had lightened significantly. Izuku held his gaze, searching for the correct answer before sighing. He set the still cap syringe down, reaching for Kacchan's shoulder. He didn't flinch back or move, and Izuku could feel his gaze on him as he grinned up at him. Taking off the right shoulder bracer, unlocking the buttons and chains that held it in place, he set it on the table. The last injunction mark under the bracer had bruised slightly. Izuku frowned, pushing his finger into it. Kacchan's shoulder twitched slightly, and Izuku stepped back, grinning at the change. He picked back up the bracer, tossing it at the user, who easily caught it. "Put it back on. I want to see you in action." He took the syringe and set it off to the side as Kacchan rehooked the bracer on, the metal rivets clinking loudly. The next injunction would have to wait until after, to limit any tightness or lack of movement that might come from it. He wanted to see the full range of motion he had worked on for years. Izuku turned to watch the guard setting up the dummy, Kacchan's gaze still fixed on him. He bounced on his heels, clapping his hands together for Kacchan to continue. "One shot, in the middle of the chest, limit the smoke range." Kacchan huffed, but did not argue, tilting their head to watch the guard move the dummy just slightly. This was always Izuku's favorite part of his work. The result.